I found it interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the interview with Rubio, and this was extraordinary. I wish they would have unpacked it a bit more, to be honest, because this admission that the unipolar order has come to an end and we have to accept multipolarity. From my perspective, impacts everything. Because in a unipolar system, security means one country is able to dominate to such an extent no one can challenge its security. This is what brings stability in the unipolar logic, but in multipolar system, you have to take into account the security concerns of adversaries. Now, suddenly diplomacy takes on a whole new meaning. This would uproot the entire unipolar order, which the US has attempted to build since the beginning of the 90s. So,
That's
uh,
correct. And I thought the statements that Rubio made were quite intelligent. We have no idea whether that is his own observations or a reflection of a strategy agreed with President Trump. We don't hear such things from President Trump, anything at that conceptual level. So, but what Rubio said was what you and I and others have been discussing for years, which is that in fact we've already reached a multipolar world. Biden, Sullivan, Blinken never recognized it or acknowledged it or accepted it, at least at that political level. But Rubio said it quite straightforwardly. Um, that's the most positive single thing that has happened since the beginning of the administration. But it's quite possible that good things will happen, that the Ukraine war will stop, that the ceasefire will be enforced because Trump won't want more war, that the battles with China will be left to this mild tit for tat on trade. It's possible, actually, that peace breaks out in this way. Uh, but I think we're still very early days to make any assertions in that regard.
well, you used the word confusion before, and I thought, well, this summarized my thoughts, not just on the Middle East, but also on the Ukraine issue, because Trump made it very clear he wants to end the war. Again, ideally, he would want it in the first 24 hours, but then extended it. When he said that he recognized NATO expansion triggered the war, this was very different from suggesting it was unprovoked, which means there was just an imperial impulse by Russia, which has to be countered as opposed to find a compromise. So I think the Russians were quite eager when they heard that it sounded like he was prepared to take their security concerns into interest and take this as a point of departure to find a solution. But then he went on to threaten the Russians instead with some sanctions. He was going to reduce the oil price. For some reason, he thought Saudi Arabia would go along with this. And but now he also is talking about Ukraine paying the U.S. with its rare earth minerals in order to finance American support. So again, it's if it's not mixed signals, it is confusing. Is it? He also wants to end the war, but he also suggests he's prepared to just dump it on the Europeans to let them deal with it from now on. Is this merely seeking a return on investment of US security commitments around the world as opposed to being a drain on resources, or do you think he has any wider ambitions in terms of ending conflict with the Russians to bring Russia a bit closer to the West as opposed to leaning towards China, or you think it's a lot of improvisation going on? Because I get it's it's a
Yes,
bit too much happening too fast, as I began saying.
I think the a starting point is that there are many voices in Washington. There are many voices in the blob of the security establishment. Uh, President Putin famously observed in a 2017 interview that presidents come into office with ideas, but then men in dark suits and blue ties come and tell them about the realities. No doubt some of that is happening. By the way, he meant realities in quotation marks. In other words, deep state or CIA realities. So part of what is happening is that Trump's not alone. Even King George III, whom the U.S. Revolted against in 1776, was not alone. There was a cabinet, there was a parliament, and so forth. So Trump is not alone in this, though he completely dominates the news cycle. Maybe you could say he shares it with Elon Musk, but it's the two of them to the exclusion of everybody else almost in the world right now. So one thing is that there are many voices in Washington. There is a second point, I believe, uh, and that is that Trump probably either greatly overstates the hand that he has. In other words, that he thinks the U.S. bargaining power is much larger than it is, or he's a great BS artist and knows that the hand is weak, but therefore comes out with special bluster. But the point is, I don't think the U.S. has all so much leverage in many different places. The U.S. cannot face down China, for example, not even thinkable in our world. The U.S. can't win a war with China. God forbid there would be one. It could end the world. But it's not as if threats can really solve problems. The U.S. cannot threaten Saudi Arabia or the Arab world to say, you take the refugees from Gaza or else. There is no or else. The U.S. can't even threaten Europe if Europe, which is the worst bargainer in the whole world, of course, because it's 27, uh, some of which are vassal states of the U.S., trying to come up with some position. But even trade policy, the U.S. market is just not so big and dominant, or the dollar so overwhelming. Quite the contrary, the U.S. depends on financing from abroad that Trump can just make threats, except if everybody cowers and falls into line. So there's a lot of bravado. There's a lot of confusion. There is, in my view, no clear strategy uh, at this stage, and there may not be a clear strategy. We should also understand that the U.S. is filled with internal problems. The U.S. is filled with internal political problems that are quite deep. We have a chronic budget deficit now of 7% of GDP, which is large, with a prospect of rapidly rising debt relative to national income, huge social issues that haven't even been mentioned once since the government came in. There's no talk about the health crisis, the social crisis, the poverty crisis, the housing crisis, except throw out illegal migrants. That's the only part of that discussion. And they want to spend more on the military. There's now talk of uh, trillions more on upgrading the nuclear so-called arsenal, plus uh, a new Iron Dome space-based anti-ballistic missile system of hundreds of billions of dollars of completely unproved technologies. Uh, with budget cuts. That is Trump's greatest aspiration. So there are many, many, many deep contradictions, at, and I don't see them going away. Now, is it possible good things could happen? Yes. The way you started by imposing a coherent intellectual structure on all of this is absolutely a possible outcome that the administration could choose, which is retrenchment, which is peace with Russia, peace with China. You stay out of our neighborhood, we stay out of your neighborhood. We tone down, we return to a nuclear arms control framework. We end the war in the Middle East with a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel. All of that is within reach. It could be in 6 months that, my God, this is a new sensible world. It's not impossible. Uh, but we shouldn't say that that's the strategy yet because we have absolutely no confidence that that is the strategy and that it is somehow the strategy that could be imposed by Trump and his team, even if they want it, because they're not alone in Washington.